This is episode 96 with Jared Angaza.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Bryan Teare.
We are the architects of what happens in our lives. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Bryan Teare, and those were my words on this week's episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast with a very special guest indeed, Jared Angaza. Now, Jared is a brand architect and philanthropist who spent the last 20 years creating brands, strategies, events, and teachings that help us transform our perspectives and reimagine what's possible. He coaches and consults for individuals, brands, and governments across the globe as part of his lifelong quest to contribute to a more harmonious world. This includes multiple organizations, movements, and even governments from countries like the United States, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Kenya. Jared is a lifelong student of creativity, economics, science, strategy, philanthropy, consciousness, and indigenous cultures, and believes that we are all extraordinary beings created to thrive through deep relationships, nature, spirituality, and creativity. Now, I was recently a guest on Jared's podcast, and I decided to share that interview here as we covered topics a little deeper than I've ever shared before on the show. Because we went deep, I split the interview up into 2 episodes, and this is part 1 of those 2 episodes. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn the power of community in creating change, my issue with the whole follow your passion motto, understanding the hero's journey and how it applies to your life, how to navigate doing what you love while still paying the rent, why your struggle is a necessary and normal part of the journey, the trends I see in 20-somethings today, and how to use your thoughts to create reality. As always, you can catch the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/096. But for now, guys, let's go check out part 1 of our interview with Jared Angaza.
Bryan, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. I'm really excited about having you here. I'm a fan of your podcast and the Quarter Life Comeback. I'm excited to dive into some discussion about your personal journey and vision.
Yeah, Jared, thank you so much for having me. And hi to everyone listening. I'm excited to get into it.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your tackling of this particular issue, the Quarter Life Comeback, and I've never heard it framed that way, but I think it makes sense, and it's important, and it's this age group and people that are kind of in that quarter life arena of their life, I think, are interested in impact. They're interested in their impact. What impact am I making? How can I make a more deliberate impact, and so on. So it's a very interesting conversation to me. Tell us just a little bit, just kind of get us started in on your journey. And I know your mission is to empower, people to create the life they want and to become the hero of their life's journey. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I guess it all stemmed from my story, which it's often we teach the thing we most need to learn, and I guess that's how this kind of happened. Is I went through, growing up, I had a really good family and a really good upbringing. And I always did the thing we are told we need to do to achieve success in life. I did really well at school academically and at sports. And I went to a good university. I did a good degree. I did civil engineering. There were times where I had to choose what to study, and I thought about different routes, and my dad kind of nudged me to do a real degree. And so I did engineering, which, I didn't, at the time, I really just didn't know what I wanted to do. So it wasn't like I regretted going into civil engineering. But again, same thing happened. I did really well academically again, got a good job. And about 2.5 years into that job, due to, a couple of life events that just kind of coincided, and meeting certain people and coming across certain things online and reading certain things, I got to a point where I started to question, like, what is this actually what I want to be doing or where I want to be? And the answer was no. But again, I didn't know what the alternative was. I didn't know what that thing is that I wanted to do. And so I guess this is like what people define as the quarter life crisis. And just kind of, this process of experimenting with different things and finding what interested me and where I could make an impact. I started to become really passionate about this phase of life, and even more so passionate about people choosing their own path and not feeling like they had to do, the conventional route of just stick at a 9 to 5 for the rest of your life and be happy because you've got a paycheck. To me, there was always something in the back of my head, like there's more to life than this. And I had this realization that no one's going to make life awesome for me. And if I wanted to create something different, it was up to me to go and make that happen. And so I left that job with no plan B, my engineering job. And that's when, this whole experimentation phase started. And then, as I said earlier, like we teach what we most need to know. I had a previous blog, which was more health focused. One of the things that I did after quitting my corporate job was become a personal trainer and then more of a health coach. And so my previous blog or website was more health focused. And then I rebranded in the beginning of 2016 to focus on my personal brand, which spoke to this sort of, life as a topic in general and not just health. And that's when I decided to launch my podcast. And there were 3 reasons for that. The first was that I didn't need to be an expert on everything. I could speak to people who knew more about certain topics than I did. I could grow my own network and meet other inspiring people. And the third was that I wanted to ask certain questions and learn some of these things myself. And I just thought if I can do that and help other people at the same time who are going through a similar thing, then, win-win. And that's kind of when the quarter life comeback was born, playing on this idea of the quarter life crisis. But I thought, why not switch it around and make it something more positive and empowering? And I just like the sound of a comeback and quarter life comeback. And the message is like, you don't have to feel trapped by where you are right now. You can create your own path. And I try guests on and mentors and experts in various fields that kind of empower people to make those changes that they need to inevitably just kind of achieve and live the life that they want to live.
Excellent. Well, I think you described this. It just dawned on me as we're talking, but you described this kind of situation where you've started to create a platform for this quarter life comeback discussion. And in that, you've created a community, and you noted the fact that you don't have to be the expert in everything. So you bring experts in, and what happens there is you have this community of people that have advice. They've been on a journey, probably very similar journeys in some regards in terms of the formulas and things that came out of that. But you've created this communal kind of situation, and it's interesting the podcast community, which I'm now part of as well, and it's been really cool the relationships that have come out of that. And on this show we talk a lot about the indigenous wisdom and specifically American Indian wisdom, and I'm reading this amazing book right now about American Indian healing, and one of the things they talk about so much there is that they create a healing kind of formula and process through community. Like that is the answer, community. It's like when you're outside of the community, the expectation is that the hopes of you getting better is pretty slim. But when you bring someone into that community and you have this conversation back and forth, like what you're doing with your podcast and those conversations that you're having there, that's where healing can come. That's where epiphanies come out of the sky and new visions and ideas. So I love that you've created a platform for that. And you talk a lot about. I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan, and I assume you are as well. Mm-hmm. In the whole discussion about the hero's journey, and you talk about becoming the hero in your own life's journey. Tell me about that.
Yeah, like, and just to touch on the community aspect again, and I'll come back to the hero's journey in a sec, but often I think this is probably in general how human beings operate, but certainly in the 20-something space, we think that the thing we're going through is unique, or that we are broken, or there's something wrong with us for feeling this way. But actually, it's the complete opposite. And that's why I love the podcast as well, is because I'll get people emailing me and saying, like, I thought this was just something I was going through, but actually it seems like so many people are also going through this. And I love being able to kind of provide that insight, in that there's not something wrong with you if you're feeling like the place you are right now isn't where you want to be. But back to the hero's journey. So inevitably, there's like the 3 stages of the hero's journey, which if anyone listens to your podcast, I'm sure they're well aware of it. It's like the separation, the initiation, and the return. And I guess like kind of played out in my life with, before I even knew about Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, in that my separation was, leaving my job, suddenly having this call that this isn't the thing I'm meant to be doing, and leaving the job. And, I guess the initiation then is all the learnings and the low points and the obstacles and the hurdles I went along in the process. Like there were, I don't know if it's a problem that I would say I have with the whole like follow your passion thing, but there's this big image, and due to social media, where people see people quitting their jobs and starting their own thing, and it looks so glamorous. But there were times where I didn't know how I would put food on the table that week or pay rent that month. There were some months I couldn't pay rent that month. And I think those are all tests of like how badly you really want it. And it's all an opportunity for you to declare to the universe or God or whatever you believe in, whichever sort of higher power you believe in. I think those are all opportunities for you to make a declaration of like, I'm in this for the long run, and this is what I want. And, some small obstacle is not going to stop me from getting it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that separates people who inevitably end up creating the life they want versus people who don't, and who have to go back to doing the thing that made them miserable in the first place. Is I think it's just a degree of grit, and like, how badly do you really want this? And how much are you willing to go through to make it happen? And there are times where, maybe it's wise to admit admit you were wrong about something and kind of change course. But I think to a large extent, a lot of people probably give up too soon, and don't really give it enough time to kind of slay the dragons, as Joseph Campbell would say. And so then I guess like the return for me, and I think I'm probably still in the initiation phase, but the return phase would be, helping other people through this, and sharing what I've learned along the way, and sharing the people who I've met along the way with my listeners. And so, yeah, I think that's how the hero's journey's kind of played out for me, and certainly plays a big part in what I try and inspire people with, and kind of teach and work with my clients with, is like, there are going to be obstacles, and that is perfectly okay. That is part of the process. So yeah, man, I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. There's a dynamic that happens, I think, when people are, and I've had a lot of similar experiences in my journey of kind of going my own way, and I've always I've had a pretty constant path, I guess, of going my own way most of my life. And what's happened from some of that is, it puts me in a situation where like I'm following my dreams and passions and so on, and doing these things that seem glamorous on the front end, and then in the back end I can't pay my rent, and so I had to go through that journey as well. But I think you're right in that when it's that contrast that comes into play in your life, that you find out what you're made of. You find out, and some people stick with it, and some people say, this is not for me. I'd rather go back to something that's a little bit more safe and secure, even though, it may be mind numbing and not very passionate and whatever. But I think the thing that we have to remember always is that I don't know if you know Richard Rohr or not. He's kind of a modern mystic, and I'm a big fan. He talks. He has a book actually called "Everything Belongs," and that's tough, man. Especially, I'm coming from the human rights sector of the world and fighting for human rights, and it's difficult to go into that arena and say everything here belongs. That's another deep discussion. But just on the personal entrepreneurial kind of following your dreams and passions level, we have to realize that when these contrast things come in, like can't pay your rent, for instance, there's a contrast that comes in that allows us an opportunity to really dig deep and look inward and find out who we are. And without that contrast, we're a little less prone to look more deeply inward, right? And so you think about all of our heroes out there, the people that we want to emulate to some degree or whatever. Who would they be without the contrast? Like, it wouldn't even really be even that interesting of a story. Mm-hmm. So we can look at it out there and say, okay, that contrast is cool. That makes sense. But then we have contrast in our own life. We're like, oh, this sucks, man. I can't do this. So I think we have to make that mental switch of realizing that this contrast is here for a reason. What can I learn from it? And sure, it's not going to be fun at the time sometimes, but you can at least say, I understand that there's purpose in this. And then do that inward contemplative kind of journey and connecting with the higher self and so on. And I think that's very important in the whole scheme of things.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like, I don't know if if people are listening to this and they geek out over Joseph Campbell. I'm sure they've watched Finding Joe, the documentary. I watch that at least every quarter, and what they said in Finding Joe is, the reason why we resonate so strongly with these cartoon superheroes and like the characters in our favorite movies is because they're kind of following the hero's journey, and it's calling to us to do the same thing. And it's almost like the thing we admire the most about heroes and our role models and our idols is that they kind of face their adversity and turn that into their advantage. And yet that is the thing we fear the most, and like the thing that we are most hesitant about. It's kind of a funny paradox. It's like the thing we admire the most, but also the thing we're most, hesitant to take on.
And we get blinded by life. People say life happens.
I've never really understood what that means either. Like when people say life gets in the way, like I don't really know what they mean, because everything is life. So I don't really know how life can get in the way.
I think it's an easy kind of way to exit the conversation. Typically, when people say, "Oh, life happens," you're like, "Oh, okay, that's an excuse everyone uses. We'll go with that." But anyway, you mentioned at one point in the beginning here that you had this kind of moment or period of time or whatever where you realized there's got to be more than to life than this. What are some of the moments or experiences that you felt along the way that were kind of proof of that and sort of a lure and pulling in you in this direction?
That's a great. So just to recap, like what things have happened that kind of reminded me, like, yes, there is more to life than this.
Yeah, I mean, typically what happens is we have an experience or something, and you get a taste of that, and you're like, oh my God, there is more to life than what I've been living in the day-to-day when I was saying life happens and things like that. So and sometimes there are sort of pivotal moments or people or experiences or whatever that come along that make you, that sort of spur you and maybe push you off the ledge when you're skydiving. What are some of those that have happened?
Well, yeah, so I'm just going to kind of go through what comes to mind. I was never, like, growing up, I never really spent much time on the computer or like browsing the internet. And then a friend of mine, so this conversation is going to go all over the place. A friend of mine started a friend of mine at the sort of start of the CrossFit boom started a CrossFit box. And while I've never been a CrossFitter or like never got into it, what it did do was open my eyes to the fact that, like, there are different ways to do things. You don't have to follow the conventional, if we're talking about working out, you don't have to follow the whole like exercise every day for 1 hour And even like, so CrossFit goes hand in hand with like the paleo diets. And even that was like, that opened my eyes to the fact that what we'd been told about nutrition was completely outdated. That you have to eat like so many portions of whole grains every day. And we don't have to go into nutrition now. But the bottom line is like, what that did was start opening my eyes to the fact that there are different ways to do things and look at things. And then like, as I started researching that was kind of the catalyst for me spending more time online. Because in the first, starting off, I wanted to find out more about this paleo diet that he was talking about. But then I started looking at other blogs, and I came across a site called Live Your Legend, which I'm not sure if you know that, but it's basically like people who were doing what they love and making a living doing it. So making an income and an impact. And then I started realizing, well, like it doesn't have to be either or. You can actually do something you love and make a good living from it. So all these things were kind of changing my perspective. And one of my favorite, and this might sound a little vain, but it's not intended that way. Like one of my favorite features about myself is that I consider myself pretty open-minded. And so if people come to me with like alternative perspectives, I'll hear them out. And so that kind of opened my eyes to the fact that like you can do what you love and make money from it. And then there were two videos which stood out, which was from the founder of that Live Your Legend, and then Steve Jobs' commencement speech. That made a big impact on me as well. Something else was like, growing up at school and at university, there were people who you would ask them what they wanted to do when they left school. And some of them said like, I just want to go and travel, like take a year off and go travel. And I always thought that was so cliched. And then when I quit my job, my dad, well, actually before that, I went on a 2-week trip with a couple of buddies. But then when I quit my job, my dad, and like, I told him before I quit my job that I was thinking about it and terrified that what he would say because he's very old school. But then he suggested when I had quit, he was like, well, are you going to go travel for a bit? And because I'd enjoyed that trip 2 years earlier, I was like, yeah, actually, I think I'm going to. And that trip exposed me to, on that trip, I was like, now I get it. Now I know why people say they want to travel. And it just exposed me to, like, there's so much more out there than our small bubble that we surround ourselves with. And there are so many different ways to do things. And like, your sense of reality is one way, but there are people who are doing things completely differently in a different part of the world. So that was a big shift for me as well. And then, yeah, I think more recently, like actually being able to pay all my bills by doing things that I have chosen to do, that's been a big sort of motivator for me. In that I don't need to answer to someone else necessarily to be able to put food on the table. I think that's all that comes to mind right now on the sort of glimpses as to there's more to life than just what you think there is.
Yeah, I've noticed on your website you have this list, which I think is really cool, and I'm a big I'm a list taker and note taker, and Evernote is my closest friend. I'm looking at Evernote for the notes for this discussion.
I do the same.
And you have this life list, and I think this is kind of a good segue into that discussion because you talk. I noticed in there that you've traveled quite a bit, and one of my questions to you was about your travels and like what are the how is some of that. Obviously, we understand that your travels have impacted your perspective. That's kind of a given. Are there any places that sort of stand out in terms of a place or maybe even a specific experience that's really impacted your perspective, and in what way?
I don't know if I'd say a specific place, but just travel in general. And most of my travel's been to Southeast Asia. I think it just comes back to what I said before. Like, it just opens your eyes to the way that people do. And for people listening, I'm from South Africa, which is still a third world country. So I understand that the way that we do things would be very different from the people in the States. Even though my city is pretty much as first world as you could get, the majority of the country is still very much rural. But I think it's more traveling in general that kind of had an impact on me. And also I traveled solo. So it really shows you what you're capable of. And, the sense of independence was big for me as well. And it comes back to what I said earlier about like, if, no one's going to make life awesome for you. And it's the same with the traveling. Like if I'm at a cafe and I'm on my own, I could either sit by myself or I can go and speak to the other people. So I could either speak to other people and like make new friends and have cool experiences, or I could just have a boring holiday by myself. So that was a big one, is like getting out of my comfort zone and learning just what I'm capable of and proving to myself that I can do things independently. And that's not why I went traveling on my own. I didn't really have a set aim, like when I come back, I'm going to feel like this. But it's certainly things that I experienced along the way.
Excellent. Well, in terms of the quarter lifers and that, by the way, what, just for the audience, what age group do you put in the quarter life?
Yeah, I don't actually know if I'm mad about the term, because it kind of implies that you live to 100. When I started, I was focused on like 20s and early 30s. More recently, it's more focused on 20-somethings. But even saying that, I have people who are a lot older than that, people in their 40s who are listening to my show. And, the one guy said that maybe I should change the name because it excludes certain people. And there's like plenty other people who deal with feeling unsure about where they are in their life. But yeah, I target my content at 20-somethings.
Okay. What do you think is a trend that you see in that kind of age group, or I mean, obviously with the age group goes kind of a perspective that maybe you're speaking to, and we've described that a little bit. What are some of the trends that you see happening in that realm that excite you and maybe even worry you, and what do you think is needed in that arena?
Yeah, so at the moment, 20-somethings are, I guess you could call them the millennials. Millennials obviously won't always be 20-somethings because they'll get older.
Right.
But I think the things that worry me, I'll start with those. I like to end on a positive note. So
perfect.
The things that worry me are the illusion that you have to follow your passion, and that if you're not doing that, it's kind of like you're wasting your time. And I think it can be very dangerous because it can force people to quit jobs when they maybe aren't sure what to do next, which ironically, as I'm saying that, I realize is what I did. But I do think it's a dangerous place to be in. Let me think if there's any other kind of things that worry me about that age group. Yeah, I think I think that's the main one, is the danger of advising people to just follow their passion. I think there's a lot more that goes into it. I think there's a lot more sense in following your purpose, which passion is just one part of. And we can maybe get into that later. But things that I'm really excited about is, I think this generation is asking a lot more questions, both of themselves and of the world in a broader sense. I think they aren't as scared to experiment and explore and test what we believe is the reality. And I think millennials as well are more concerned about making an impact and feeling part of like a bigger vision. Certainly in a employment sense, like when it comes to picking a company, I think they're more concerned about working towards a bigger vision than necessarily just a paycheck or safety. But certainly I think the biggest thing is, we're asking questions and we're looking at different ways to do things, and we're not just accepting what we've been told is the way to do things.
Yeah, I think it presents a very different kind of dynamic socially, because we had this time, in the last 20 years or whatever, where it was all about, achievements and what your degrees and all this information kind of stuff, and sort of the academia world and the job that pays very well and that's prestigious and so on. And we're seeing a bit of a shift in that now to saying, well, perhaps, not necessarily even touching on that box, but maybe looking at this additional box that says, what about purpose? Like, what if I was striving for something more purposeful? And I think because of the proliferation of information on the internet, we have transparency like never before in terms of the way that economics works and so on. So we're starting to see a little bit of that as well. The veil has come off. So people are realizing that they're having an impact through their lifestyle, and realizing that they haven't been very deliberate about what that impact would be, because they kind of had a tunnel vision towards this goal of being prestigious and respected and having the academic background and so on. And now it's shifting a bit, which I think is causing a lot of confusion with people. So they're in this, and that confusion, that quandary, that having to having a problem that you have to figure out that's a bit different than the problems that you've had to deal with in the past. I like that. It's encouraging to me, because that's where new growth happens. That's where new ideas come from. That's where innovation comes from, in my opinion. And it's through this new big problem, like, what's my purpose, and what's that going to look like vocationally, and how's that going to impact my lifestyle? How's it going to affect my innate desires for comfort and security, and now status, thanks to Facebook? So there's this new thing that's happening. And I think, again, that's part of my attraction to what you're doing with this discussion with the Quarter Life Comeback, is because you're tackling that thing and saying, okay, how do we untangle that? And what does that look like? And what could possibly, what could come from that's positive and beautiful for society?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
What is the in this discussion that you've been having with people that you've been inviting onto the show, the experts and so on? Is there any big piece of advice or a moment in the show or whatever that you've had that you look at and you say, wow, that was awesome? There was something really beautiful that came out of that.
Yeah. So I ask all guests the same final 3 questions. Most of the show is conversational and unscripted, but then at the end I ask, what do you wish you'd been told in your 20s? What is the greatest opportunity for quarter lifers today? And what one thing can people do this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback? And it's been really cool to see the common threads through all the guests. And the biggest one is definitely just get started. You might have an idea for something, or a side gig idea, which again, side gigs, I'm really passionate about side gigs, and projects, passion projects and that kind of thing, as a way to explore and experiment with finding your purpose. But yeah, get started. Just take the first small step that you can towards making whatever it is that you want to create in the world, towards making that happen. And if it still feels intimidating or overwhelming or confusing, then it's because your next step is just too big and you need to kind of break it down even smaller. So that's been a really cool thing to see, is those common threads. And that's certainly been the biggest one. In terms of individual episodes, the one that I come back to again and again that really stood out for me was with a guy he's probably one of the older guests I've had on, which I really like because it's more of a sort of mentor perspective than someone who's gone through this kind of thing recently. And his name was Tom Asacker. And the part that really stood out for me was he said, he spoke about beliefs and how he said, even positive thinking is still just a belief. And what you really want to focus on is experiences. And the thing that he said, which I'll never forget, is too many people are trying to find their purpose out there. So whether that's thinking about it or trying to come up with theoretical solutions, when your purpose isn't out there, it's in here. And you'll see, I'm pointing to my chest right now, but what he said is like, we're trying to figure out by thinking of our purpose, when we only really discover that by experimenting and exploring with different things that interest us, and then feeling into what that makes us feel like when do I actually feel excited, and when does my body tell me like this is something to pay attention to?
Absolutely. You're touching on a dynamic there that I think is important to unpack a little bit. And this has to do a little bit with what you and I were discussing before offline, and we'll get into some of that now, because you were at this conference about your thoughts and how that impacts your reality and so on. So let's just dive into that, because that's fun stuff. But one of the things that I appreciate, again, going back into American Indian culture, is, we've all heard the term the rain dance, and what that, you kind of have a vision in your head. Maybe it's all, different for people, but we all sort of have a little idea of maybe what that would look like. However, when you go into what that actually is, the rain dance, and let's just use that as an example. What we're talking about is prayer, I guess. But that, and that's different for everyone. And it could be prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it. But that kind of contemplative silence and connecting with a higher self and higher power and so on. In the American Indian, from that perspective, in terms of their idea of prayer, it's not like the sort of old school Christian kind of scenario of petitioning God, I need this, can you fix that? I'm scared about that. It's more of a thought process that is immersing yourself in the sort of arena of, if this were already happening, what would I be feeling right now? So if I want to be financially secure, for instance, what would it feel like for me to feel financially secure? Like, what are all the emotions that would come up and things like that? And to put it into context as an example, which kind of helps make it come to life, I guess, with the rain dance, the American Indian process for doing that, and Lakota specifically, there's a circle that's drawn in the kind of in the dirt, and you step into that circle, and there's a discussion behind that. But to skip forward, what happens is one would walk into that circle, go, silent, close your eyes, and go into this contemplative inward kind of journey scenario. And in the rain dance specifically, and I've heard an Indian friend describe it this way. He said, I go in, I step into the circle, and I don't ask for rain, and it's not a big, long, drawn out process. What it is it's a process where I envision the water coming up around my feet and the mud between my toes, and the feeling of the mud on the bottom of my foot when I move it around, the squishing of the mud, and kind of getting lost in that journey, that imaginative journey that's going on. And what you're doing is you're sort of you're transporting yourself into the future when the rain has come, and the feelings that you will have when the rain is there, and so on. And you can kind of extrapolate from there forward. But the idea is to take that formula, and to me, that's a beautiful form of prayer right there in and of itself. That is more my style of praying at this point. And it's just kind of that putting yourself into the, if this were true and it were happening kind of realm, and saying, how would I feel with that? And that gets into the discussion of your thoughts and how they impact your reality and create your own reality. And I think that, we talk about this creating your own reality scenario a lot. I think ultimately there's a nuance in that discussion, in that I think that there are infinite realities possible for us, and what we're doing is choosing which one we're going to experience. And that can, as you know, that can be different from day to day, even in the reality that you're choosing. Anyway, so I love that. What you went to this conference, and before I go off on an hour-long discussion of the power of thoughts, what was your experience there?
Yeah.
And what was the conference?
And I could nerd out about this stuff for days. So the conference was called Mind Power, and it was developed by a guy called John Kehoe, who taught it for many years, and more recently, I think for the last 15 years. So John Kehoe was an American guy, and then for the last 15 years, a guy called Robin Banks has been teaching it, and John Kehoe kind of like handed the reins over to Robin, which is kind of cool because Robin Banks is a South African guy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I like after this talk, I was like, man, this guy's like a local asset, and he teaches it all around the world. And basically, it was harnessing the power of the mind. And a lot of people think that just means like thinking positively. But your thoughts are only one part of it. Like you mentioned now, it's more than just your thoughts. It's actually like the feelings and tapping into all your senses of like, what would this actually feel like? And I've had like previous experiences with, seeing people talk about the law of attraction. And I always thought it was kind of out there, but never really understanding it fully. And after this weekend, it really kind of sunk in. They're like, no, this is how it works. And the big thing was like he mentioned the 6 laws of the mind. And I don't know if it makes sense to get into all of them, but the third law is the law of attraction, which is like thoughts that are emotionalized become magnetized and then attract similar likes and thoughts. Thoughts and experiences. And the key word there is emotionalized. It's not just thoughts. It's actually like letting that sink in and experiencing what that would feel like. Like in your case, the rain dance. But for another example, let's say, let's in the 20-something context, let's say someone's looking to make a job and they want to make like, I don't know, $10,000 a month. It would be like, what would I feel like if I was making $10,000? Like, what would my life be like? What would I do on a day-to-day basis? What emotions would I be feeling? How would I spend my time? Like, who would I see? And it's really tapping into not just thoughts, but like a clear vision. And I think something that Robin mentioned as well, which I'd seen before, through, it might have been like Jim Carrey or someone like that, but was like, the mind doesn't know what has happened and what hasn't happened. Like the mind can't distinguish between a real experience you've already had or an experience you just live out in your mind, which I think is the coolest thing ever. And once you like,
yes,
once you live out an experience in your head, it's almost, and this is how I understand it, it's like the universe kind of conspires to make that happen, and to kind of turn that into reality. And I've certainly experienced that myself. Like you can call it coincidence or luck or whatever, but I choose to believe that we are kind of the architects of what happens in our lives. And just some personal examples, like where do I even begin? Like one of the first things I thought when I quit my job was like, I really want to be able to work from anywhere. And this whole like digital nomad thing, even though I don't think the whole digital nomad thing is necessarily being able to work from your laptop on the beach, which I've never understood either because all that sand. But just being able, like, I wanted to be able to decide when I worked, and I would like picture what that would look like, and not with any expectation of like, this needs to happen, because I think there's an importance of non-attachment as well. And now I'm in a position where that is the case, and I do choose when I work. I choose to work more than I healthily should, but that's another discussion.
It's a journey, man.
Yeah, and I think that's still part of me letting go, and like, I'll be okay if I don't work for 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And then more recently, when I was kind of building up my coaching practice, I worked with a business coach, and we kind of got clear at the end of like who I want to work with. And I said, like, I really want to work with young entrepreneurs and help them get clear on a vision, and turn that vision for both their business idea and their life, like into actionable steps and goals that they can follow, and like keep them accountable and keep them on track. And not even like, I don't even think it was a month later, I got an email from a person who found me through LinkedIn. And they offered me a position on this fellowship that they run with the top young entrepreneurs in South Africa, and doing exactly what I had said with the people that I want to work with. So that's like two small examples, but I've had other examples too, where it's just like things I've thought about. And again, I think the key is not becoming attached to those things, but just putting them out there. And things I've thought about, like, I'd really love for this to be the case, or that kind of thing. And then seeing them pop up. And the cool thing is, like, it's not always going to emerge in the way we originally thought. But it will still be kind of like in the same sort of theme. And yeah, I strongly believe that once we make a declaration to the universe or God or whoever you believe is kind of pulling the strings, I think opportunities start popping up that we could never have planned beforehand. And I don't think any of that is a coincidence. So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up part 1 of the interview with Jared and episode 96 here on the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. I cannot believe we're so close to that incredible 100 episode number. And if you liked this interview as much as I did, please share it around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Bryan Teare to let me know your biggest takeaway. For me, it was what we got into right near the end, which was using your thoughts to create your reality, as well as the concept of the hero's journey, and that your struggle is a normal and necessary part of the whole journey. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/096, and make sure you subscribe at quarterlifecomeback.com to get all these episodes and more as soon as they go live. Thanks once again for joining me this week. I appreciate you more than you know. And until next week, keep creating your quarter life comeback.